The fact that I emotionally abused my husband led to the end of our marriage. I regret it every day because I know I was the toxic person in the marriage. But he laid hands on me one time, and I made sure he regretted it for the rest of his life. Now he wants to leave this marriage. I will tell you how everything started. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. My name is Rose. Our relationship with Henry spanned over a decade, starting when we were just college sweethearts at Boston University. For 6 years, we weren't just a couple, we were an actual unit, the kind of best friends who could sit in comfortable silence or finish each other's complex thoughts. I was intensely proud of him, watching him navigate the cutthroat world of corporate finance, ultimately landing a prestigious job in New York. We moved into a stunning historical brownstone in the Brooklyn Heights neighborhood, the epitome of the life we'd always dreamed of. Our families finally met, the wedding was a lavish, picture-perfect affair, and soon after, our beautiful son, George, arrived. Now a charming, inquisitive 7-year-old. Everything looked immaculate from the outside, a testament to our perseverance and love. However, the first hairline cracks appeared when I decided I couldn't simply be his equal. I needed to be his master. Henry had a short fuse, a trait I secretly saw as a weakness to exploit. Our problems truly began when I started orchestrating situations, driven by a desperate, toxic urge to make him feel a sense of profound powerlessness, to make him believe he had absolutely no control over me, our life, or the outcome of any disagreement. This was my hidden agenda, the subtle revenge for every slight, real or imagined. My campaign of subtle emotional terrorism started small but quickly escalated. It wasn't about communication. It was about humiliation, improving dominance. Henry would try to have a calm discussion about bills or scheduling, and I would instantly turn it into an indictment of his character, his competence, or his love for me. He was capable, but I wanted him to be docile. The moment he'd show any sign of resistance, any hint of his old temper, I'd deploy my nuclear option, the dramatic exit. I'd pack a massive suitcase, slamming drawers and cabinets, ensuring the noise was loud enough to disturb George upstairs. I wouldn't just leave for a walk. I'd drive 3 hours straight to my family's estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. I did this not because I needed comfort, but because I needed an audience and powerful allies. The journey itself was part of the performance. The tearful phone calls on the highway, the selective, carefully edited version of events I presented upon arrival. I positioned myself as the tragically abused wife, and Henry, the devoted father who paid for the lavish life we led, became the designated villain in our family's narrative. This staged victimhood was the mechanism by which I ensured his complete isolation and misery. My sisters, Clara and Victoria, were the aggressive, indispensable muscle of my emotional campaign. The moment I walked through the door, mascara streaming, they would snatch up their phones. They didn't offer rational advice. They delivered scathing, relentless attacks. They would bombard Henry's personal and work lines with calls, texts, and emails, screaming accusations of abuse and misogyny. They treated him with open contempt, ensuring he felt utterly paralyzed by the combined force of the women in my family. I never told them to stop. In fact, I would quietly hand them his new number or confirm his location. Their interference wasn't a side effect of my leaving. It was the primary objective. It was the most effective form of collateral revenge, a relentless, inescapable barrage of judgment that chipped away at his professional reputation and sanity. I loved the feeling of watching this strong, capable man become a trembling mess under the weight of my sister's verbal assaults. It confirmed my power, and that toxic confirmation was all the fuel I needed to perpetuate the cycle. If he ever dared to push back against their abuse, I simply reminded him that a truly loving husband would endure anything for his family. This constant erosion of his self-worth led Henry to withdraw completely. He started putting in punishing 80-hour work weeks just to avoid the tension I created at home. He lost weight, he stopped answering calls from his old friends, and his eyes carried a perpetual shadow of exhaustion. Yet my own debilitating pride still demanded that I test him, that I ensure he remained tethered to my misery. Whenever I sensed a flicker of independence, a moment where he seemed almost happy, I'd throw down the ultimate chilling gauntlet. "If you're so miserable, Henry, why don't you just divorce me?" I would deliver the line with icy precision, knowing it terrified him. I never wanted a divorce. I was terrified of failing, of the stigma, of the judgment from my high society circle. My only goal was to see him flinch, to watch the panic flood his eyes, confirming his desperate need for me. I wanted him to know I had the power to detonate his life, but that I chose to be merciful. It was a twisted, self-serving form of emotional control, and the constant threat of nuclear separation was my favorite tool of revenge against his perceived emotional distance. I was playing a game of chicken, convinced he would always swerve first. The inevitable breaking point arrived on a Tuesday evening in late November, a cold, drizzly night that felt heavy with impending doom. The catalyst was utterly insignificant, a disagreement about a charity event that I had forgotten to RSVP for. But fueled by months of silent resentment and my relentless need for conflict, I decided to annihilate him. I didn't just argue, I tore into him, insulting his recent performance reviews, ridiculing his choice of friends, and bringing up painful childhood memories I had promised never to mention. I was spitting pure, concentrated poison, determined to elicit a powerful, visible reaction. Henry's face was a mask of sheer agony, his body rigid, his hands shaking at his sides. He was physically trying to absorb the venom, desperate not to unleash the temper he desperately controlled. But I saw the deep, raw despair in his eyes, and instead of stopping, I felt a grotesque surge of adrenaline. I wanted more. I wanted him to fall apart completely, to beg me to stop. I needed that ultimate submission to feed my crippling pride. In that blinding moment of vindictive rage, I acted. I didn't just yell. I pushed him, a hard, furious shove to his chest that sent him stumbling backward against the marble fireplace mantel. It was a purely physical assault, a final, desperate act to break his composure. And in that instant, years of pent-up emotional abuse finally shattered his self-control. He didn't think, he simply reacted. He struck me, a sharp, desperate blow to my shoulder. He instantly recoiled, staring at his open hand as if it belonged to a stranger, his face a picture of horror and self-loathing. But I didn't care about his regret. I felt a cold, calculated sense of victory. I had finally pushed him over the line. He turned, fumbling for the keys, and the distinct, final sound of the deadbolt locking echoed in the hallway. He had locked me out. Standing alone on the cold, polished landing, tears of triumphant rage streaming down my face, I knew I had everything I needed. I had the physical evidence. My final, catastrophic revenge was now fully loaded. I didn't hesitate. I drove straight back to my family's house in Greenwich. I presented the bruises, the proof of his barbarism, to Clara and Victoria, like medals of honor. I meticulously narrated the event, omitting the part where I had physically initiated the violence and months of emotional torment. My sisters were instantly incandescent with rage. They bypassed the family lawyer and called the police themselves, filing the most aggressive charges possible. I felt a chilling sense of powerful, righteous revenge as I sat there, listening to the siren wail in the distance of our Brooklyn neighborhood. I imagined the scene. Henry, the successful investment banker, being hauled away in handcuffs, his carefully constructed life crumbling around him. He was arrested and detained. The charges were serious. I was now the ultimate victim, and Henry was the irredeemable villain. I had achieved the perfect, public, devastating act of retribution for a single, reactive mistake he had made after years of my relentless abuse. I finally had the control I craved, but it tasted like ash and regret. The public shaming and legal jeopardy were my greatest revenge, but the blowback was immediate and severe. Henry's sister, the gentle, kind Sophia, who had always tried to mediate our disputes, reached out, not with anger, but with profound sorrow. She begged me, on behalf of their elderly parents, to withdraw the charges. Henry, out on bail and utterly broken, came to see me. He didn't come to argue or blame, he came to apologize. He fell to his knees on our living room carpet, tears of shame and exhaustion pouring out. "I am so sorry, Rose," he whispered, his voice shattered. "That was unforgivable. I know that. But you have to know that I only did that because you pushed me past the point of sanity. You were abusing me every day for years. I was drowning." His admission of guilt was laced with the raw, undeniable truth of my own malice. I looked down at him, truly seeing the man I had systematically destroyed, and the cold reality of my crime settled in. The guilt was a sudden, paralyzing weight. I knew deep down that Henry was never a violent man. He had acted out of sheer, desperate self-preservation. A single explosion after years of being pushed to the precipice. I was the true abuser, and yet he was the one facing a criminal record, the loss of his job, and public disgrace. The sight of him kneeling there, taking all the blame, was almost too much to bear. In a moment of genuine, albeit fleeting remorse, I withdrew the charge. The reconciliation that followed was a pale, fragile imitation of a marriage. It was purely transactional, a desperate attempt to create a stable environment for George. We both walked on eggshells, the unspoken truth of my cruelty and his reaction hanging over every room. The trust was gone, replaced by a brittle silence. I thought my withdrawal of the charge was an act of mercy, but it only delayed the final, inevitable reckoning. The fragile truce lasted barely 3 months. The smallest domestic incident, a forgotten grocery item, a disagreement over a weekend trip, was all it took to trigger my old habits. In a fit of frustrated rage, and simply because he disagreed with me, I packed my bags for the final time. This time, however, the adrenaline of vengeance had worn off, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. I slammed the door, expecting the usual frantic pursuit, the desperate phone calls, the begging that always validated my power. But as I walked to the car, I glanced back. Henry was standing in the doorway, quiet, motionless. He didn't chase me. He didn't even yell. He simply watched me leave with a look of profound, aching finality. That silence was the most terrifying sound of all. It confirmed what I had desperately tried to ignore. I was no longer an obstacle. I was a burden he was relieved to be rid of. I drove back to Connecticut, my victory feeling less like triumph and more like defeat. I fully expected him to call, to text, to break down by the next morning. When my phone remained silent for 2 agonizing days, I started to panic. My usual performance, the victimized wife, felt hollow. Then a call came, but it wasn't Henry. It was his colleague, frantic and worried. Henry had collapsed at his office in Midtown, rushed to St. Luke's Hospital with a severe case of stress-induced cardiac inflammation. The doctor was clear. He had suffered a breakdown due to extreme, prolonged stress. My stomach dropped. I knew, with sickening certainty, that I was the source of that stress. My urge to go to him, to see if he was okay, was immediate and powerful. It was the last flicker of humanity I had left. But once again, the toxic course of my family drowned out my conscience. As soon as I mentioned the hospital, Clara and Victoria immediately intervened. "Don't be a fool, Rose. This is a ploy," Clara warned, her voice tight with conviction. "He's faking it. He's trying to manipulate you back into a position of weakness. If you go, you're begging him to take you back, and you will lose all leverage." Victoria vehemently agreed, reinforcing the narrative of his calculated cruelty. My crippling pride seized the opportunity. The thought of appearing weak, of admitting my concern, was unbearable. So, Fueled by their poisonous advice, I stayed away. The man I swore to cherish lay alone in a New York hospital, fighting for his health, and I chose to protect my fragile ego and my manufactured narrative of victimhood. The revenge I had exacted on him was now being delivered back to me, isolating me from the only man I ever truly loved. Henry spent an entire week in the hospital, recovering alone without a single visit from me. He checked himself out on a Friday, and on the following Monday, a process server appeared at my parents' door in Greenwich. The man handed me a crisp manila envelope. Inside, I didn't find a letter of reconciliation or an apology. I found a formal summons for divorce. The man I had relentlessly tormented, the man I had driven to a physical and mental breaking point, had finally and silently cut the cord. My stomach clenched, not with sadness, but with pure, cold fury. My initial reaction was panic, followed immediately by a surge of vindictive rage. Since he had taken away my victory in the marriage, I decided my ultimate revenge would be financial. I would take everything he had ever worked for. I called my high-powered divorce attorney in Manhattan and instructed him to be absolutely brutal. I want the house, I want the bulk of his retirement, and I want massive alimony, I demanded, my voice tight with cold, calculated fury. Make him pay for walking away and for the hell he put me through. I was determined to leave him financially crippled, to ensure his newfound freedom would cost him everything he had ever worked for. This was to be my final, exquisite act of revenge. Not just divorce, but complete financial annihilation. I poured all my remaining bitterness and rage into the legal strategy, painting a compelling, meticulously fabricated picture of myself as the long-suffering, fragile wife who had been left destitute and emotionally scarred. My attorney was a shark, and together we constructed a case designed to strip him bare, focusing on the highly visible, dramatic nature of his single physical mistake, while minimizing my years of emotional cruelty. The divorce hearings began in the hushed, imposing atmosphere of the courtroom. I sat across the aisle from Henry, radiating an icy contempt, fully prepared for a vicious, protracted war. I watched him, waiting for the familiar signs of desperation, the nervous fidgeting, the arguments, the desperate pleas for leniency regarding the assets. I expected him to fight tooth and nail for every dollar, for every stock option. I was ready for him to expose his inner panic, for the long, drawn-out legal battle that would finally deliver the satisfaction of watching him break financially. I had meticulously rehearsed my testimony, preparing to deliver the heartbreaking narrative that would sway the judge entirely in my favor, completing the last vengeful step of my original plan. The stage was set for his downfall, and I felt a chilling sense of certainty that victory would be mine. A moment arrived for Henry to respond to my comprehensive demands. My lawyer presented the extensive list of assets I was claiming, including our Brooklyn home and nearly 80% of his stock portfolio. The judge turned to Henry, ready for the inevitable counter-argument. Henry, however, rose slowly, impeccably dressed, looking completely composed. He looked across the courtroom, not with malice, but with a profound, terrifying calm. His gaze bypassed me entirely and settled on the judge. His voice was quiet, steady, and utterly final. "Your Honor," he stated clearly, "I accept all of Miss Rose's demands. She can have the house, the properties, and everything we acquired together." My jaw dropped. I was stunned into silence. He continued, "All I request in return is my freedom and a clear co-parenting agreement for our son, George." His total surrender was the single greatest act of defiance he could have mustered. Henry's non-confrontational response was the ultimate, unexpected revenge. He didn't fight me for the house or the money. He simply walked away with his sanity and his dignity intact. He gave me the financial victory to expedite his escape, turning my victory into a hollow prize. We were legally divorced in July 2009. Today, Henry is happily remarried to a compassionate woman named Laura, and they live a peaceful life in upstate New York. I see their contented smiles on social media, a constant sharp reminder of the peace I sacrificed. And me? I'm trapped alone in the grand, silent house I fought so hard to possess. My family, the same sisters who encouraged my vindictiveness, now judge me relentlessly. I have money, but I am emotionally destitute, forced to rely on his child support for my actual survival. I achieved my momentary revenge, but the brutal, lingering blow of karma was far more absolute. I lost everything that truly mattered because of my excessive pride and my reliance on toxic advice. Ladies, be vigilant. Sometimes it's not the man's fault at all. It's your pride and the poisonous people you allow to advise you. Don't mistake a temporary win for a final victory. Click on the next story waiting for you on screen. Because trust me, the betrayals only get darker from here.